Hi there.
No, we're not doing this. This is not a sequel. You don't belong here. This is not Dark Souls 4, despite what you might think. As a matter of fact, about Elden Ring. Finally. Roll the intro. The beautiful mess known as Elden Ring. What a game. This is the love child of Dark Souls showrunner Hidetaka Miyazaki and Game of Thrones creator George R.R. Martin. Martin was responsible for much of the primary cast of the game, the lore, and the world building, while Miyazaki was responsible for, well, everything else. Okay, it is a video game after all. So, this game may not be called Dark Souls necessarily, but make no mistake, this is the natural progression of the Dark Souls games, which effectively makes this Dark Souls 4. Everything that Dark Souls 3 did right, this game, more or less, improves upon all that was its predecessor. So, lightning round on all of these improvements. 1. It's open world. That's not always better, but it's arguably better here. 2. Slightly improved graphical fidelity on these next-gen systems. Really pretty game. 3. Adds a jump button. Finally, no need to tell you why that's a big deal. 4. Streamlined fast travel system, plus torrent, which is a horse, for easy traversal. This is a big deal in an open world game, believe me. 5. The Ashes of War system, very much appreciated. 6. Well, I'm not sure if there is a 6, but surely there are more things, really, but still, 6 improvements that change the face of the game, that's big time. So even though it's really about it, actually, that's enough to be sure. All of those things are real improvements. And if you think that there are other improvements, put it in the comments. But don't get improvements confused for differences, because most of the things that this game does that are different than Dark Souls 3 are just that. Differences, not improvements. If you say the controls are better, then not really. And if you say the bosses are better, I say, well, not really. Just different. That's the word of the day, aside from the actual aforementioned improvements that I think few people can argue. Now, the start to the game and the story at large is nothing that the Souls series hasn't seen before. You basically crawl out of the grave with your starting gear and you're off to the starting area. In this case, Limgrave. If you want a tutorial, you can jump down a hole and face some grunt enemies as you learn the basics, but otherwise the exit is presented to you with nothing stopping you from just leaving if you're already that familiar with the game, or if you just want to learn on your own. Especially if you're on New Game Plus, you're not likely to do the tutorial again. Like just about every other Souls game, it doesn't take too long for the game to put you in your place. It gives you an unforgiving, punishing mother of a boss immediately, and that sort of thing just keeps coming. You don't have to go far or look very hard for it either. There's a lot of bosses in the game in general, even if you don't count the times where they're reused bosses for different areas, or the countless times that they took a regular, albeit tough, enemy and just use that boss instead like an actual boss. I don't know. But the point is, the bosses are numerous, to say the least, and since bosses are typically the most fun part of a Souls game, it makes sense why they would want to do that. This game also has a lot of offensive options to defeat said bosses. Again, it's not a huge improvement over Dark Souls 3 per se, especially the DLC in Dark Souls 3, as far as options, but Ashes of War is what makes it better. In case you weren't familiar with what it is, Ashes of War basically means you can take the skill or weapon art from the weapon and add it to another. Simple enough to understand, provided you have that Ash of War and the weapon you're trying to attach it to will have you. Anyway, unfortunately, From Software decided to add restrictions to certain weapons and arts, so it's not just the Wild West of weapon combos out here, as cool as that would be, but even so, there are still boss weapons that are locked to what they are. In fact, there's still Estus Flasks, Ashen Estus Flasks, Sorceries, Miracles, and Pyromancies. The weapon classes, that don't matter. I mean, after a certain point, you end up so over-leveled you can do everything, and souls are just now called runes. I mean, the differences are not exactly night and day here. The only difference is that all of these things just have a different name, that's all. If you take this all into account, it adds up to an amazing formula that caused this game to get a ton of positive professional review scores, so good on ya. Almost can't wait to see what they do next with it, but it will surely be super familiar with little in the way of series evolution. We all know I'll still buy it though, and still get suckered into this formula once again. They have never met me, but they know me so well. Anyways, that about sums up that side of the game pretty well, and since it took me so long, life and all, to actually release this video, I find myself asking this question at this point. Who is this video even for? Anyone who would click on it and want to know more about it either already knows probably just as much as I do because hands-on experience, or knows nothing and this is absolutely full of spoilers because that's how my videos are. I don't know. I should probably discuss these bosses a bit because they're truly interesting. And if you watch my Dark Souls 3 video, which I recommend you do after this if you haven't already, then you know that once again, they are the star of the show. And I'm noticing a theme here with these recent games, like Dark Souls 3 and Resi 8, they have a bit of boss cast who's who that's supposed to be unique enough for people to go, oh yeah, that one's important. So this time, our cast of ragtag misfits is truly diverse from each other and very, very strange. You don't fight every single one of them per se in this game, but that's okay. You fight most of them, so good enough. Now, if you want lore, then try Vadi Vidya or Zuli the Witch. If you want generalization and speeding past the vastness of the game for the sake of saving a little bit of time, then you got me. Now, the ones we want to talk about here are Godric the Grafted, Renala the Moon Lady, Radon and his hilarious tiny horse, Rykard the large-sized snake demon man thing, and Malekith, destined death, whatever that means. These bosses, in some combination, are required to make it to the final boss and beat the game. There is a second tier of special folks like Rani the Witch, not an actual boss, daughter of Renala though, Millennia, Blade of Mikola, the hardest boss in the game, and Mikola himself, which is Millennia's brother, who is out of commission for one reason or another. Maybe they'll use him in DLC, who knows. Now, aside from the footage shown here, there is much, much more, especially considering all the side bosses in the game that aren't required for progression. On top of that, many of them are reused over and over again to fill up the content for side areas and mini-dungeons. With this new open-world format, I understand why they had to do that. The world is just too big with too many little caves and sub-areas to fill every single one of them with unique encounters. Much of the time, they'll simply put a health bar at the bottom of the screen, make you face an ordinary enemy, and call it a boss. It's gotten to that point, and that is unfortunate, but it is what it is. See, this is something that Souls games by From Software would never have done in the past. But again, they never had to contend with an open world. And see, that leads to a bit of a problem with the game that I never had in the past with Souls games. I can't quite put my finger on it, but for whatever reason, I lost interest in this game about 1,000 times faster than I did with Dark Souls 3, and about 200 times faster than with Bloodborne. This Souls experience has what is probably the deepest combat system I've ever seen in the Souls series thus far, and by far the biggest amount of explorable space, littered with stuff to fight. But I 100% completed the game within the first month of it coming out, and only picked it back up for this video. I likely won't touch it again until true DLC drops, which hasn't happened as of this video yet, and I think the problem lies with the way the content is presented. I'm okay with side dungeons and hard to reach areas one single time, but on repeated playthroughs, I have absolutely zero motivation or interest to do those a second time. I would have to force myself to do them again if I wanted to squeeze more out of this game. It kinda just turned into speedrunning after a second New Game Plus for some reason. I just wanted to see how fast I can beat the Elden Beast after crawling out of the grave. I don't know, I spent over 200 hours per character on like 5 different characters in Dark Souls 3, just for comparison's sake. One character clocked over 600 hours by themselves. I'm not proud to say that like I sound like I am, but that's what happened. And with Elden Ring, I got just the one character, doing the job of many characters and many builds, and they get less than 200 hours by themselves. And that's it. I have all the achievements, I've seen all the endings, and I'm done. Less than 1 month of playtime. That strikes me as odd, and I wonder if there's a way to fix that in any potential sequel this might get. As far as gameplay goes, it is the most polished here, as the Ashes of War or weapon arts, or whatever you want to call them, has gone to new heights for this game. If some of these Ashes of War were put into the Souls games in the past, it would break the game. This gameplay footage I recorded, I think, has been varied enough to have plenty of examples, but messing around with the sheer weapon variety here is enough to keep the game worth playing beyond what I think it offers as far as content goes. You could totally tell right from the jump that this game was going to be in for a ton of awards and Game of the Year recognition as soon as you started playing it. Not to mention all the other random little lesser awards that a game can win. It'll take home probably all of them, except for the most unfortunate release timing of the year, and that goes to my lady Aloy. Dead on arrival. Let's pour one out for Aloy. Anyway, this stuff is good. Real good. And finally though, these bosses. From Software has put their usual spit and polish on them, and it shows. Honestly, they wouldn't be out of place in other Souls games, just as the bosses from other Souls games wouldn't be out of place here, both in their design and how they function with their moveset. If I took the Dancer of the Boreal Valley and slapped it down somewhere in the lands between, nothing would be amiss. That seems to be perfectly reasonable and a reasonable fit for this game as well. That said, however, being more specific would probably be nice, so let's get started. So let's start with Godric. He likes to be more of a brute, focusing on heavy melee attacks mostly, but he does have a few tricks up his many arms when fighting from afar. Most notably his gust attacks he likes in this big jump thing that he does to close the gap. When he goes into his phase 2, he grafts a dragon's head to his severed arm on the fly. That's right, and he incorporates its flame breath into the fight as another ranged option, which he demonstrates immediately upon entering phase 2. Now, he's intended as the first big rune holder and does a nice job at introducing the concept while not being so powerful it's unfair. Super weird guy though. Next, I'll talk about Renala, because why not? Also, I think they intended for her to be the next up on the chopping block, but I'm not sure. Once you make your way through Raya Lucaria, it's the academy for mages, I guess, and get to Renala, she first wants to toy with you by making you deal with all of her little gimpy academy students who may or may not be suffering from polio. No doubt the result of the rebirth they underwent, but more on that later. Once you kill the students who specifically hold her barrier together, she descends to the floor and you commence with the beatdown. This is just one of the most video gamey bosses in the entire game. She might as well be a Zelda boss with a system like that. Anyways, when she enters her phase 2 of the fight, she makes a new, more appropriate battlefield in which to fight her proper. And as she is the epitome of a caster build incarnate, she has huge offensive potential, but low HP and defense. Meaning once you make your way over to her and begin to attack her, she doesn't tend to last much longer at that point. She's also the only one who doesn't straight up die when you beat her, and actually becomes a friendly NPC in charge of respeccing your character via the in-game lore of Rebirth. You just need a larval tear, and you're good to go. So, while so many in the game are optional, I feel as though Star Scourge Radon is one you don't want to miss. His fight is very unique, even amongst FromSoft bosses. It's presented as a festival of sorts, which right off the bat is unique, which more or less means he's so powerful that he's okay with being ganked by a ton of people, because he knows he can most likely kill all of them and still win. And that's what happens. You start the fight about a mile away from him, and have the opportunity to summon all kinds of NPCs to partake in the festivities with you. True to his word, Radon will randomly kill most of them, but they can be resummoned if you're so inclined. Aside from him trying to snipe you at the beginning of the fight and kill you before you even reach him with a lot of bullshit ranged attacks, the actual fight itself is pretty straightforward after that. Until he and his poor little dying mini-horse just shoot into the stars together and he falls back down to earth as a giant meteor. This got me the very first time I did this fight, but is easy enough to avoid that it hasn't got me since. Anyways, beat him and you're good to go. Meteor showers rain and you're free to progress the story further. Maniac. At this point you should naturally be able to make it to the Altus Plateau without the Volcano Manor skip from Raya Lucaria, or climbing the mine shaft, which is actually kind of fun. But once you do, Snake Man Rykard is probably who's next on your shit list. This is more of a gimmick fight, as you probably will have a hard time dealing meaningful damage. So he's like the Storm King from Demon Souls, or Yorm the Giant from Dark Souls 3. You have the option to use a gimmick weapon that only properly functions during this fight in order to make it pretty much trivial. Otherwise, it's going to be really, really tough, and you'll probably have a bad time. Aside from the boss design itself, he's not much to write home about, especially if you use the gimmick weapon on him. So instead of going in a lot of depth on the merits of his moveset and all that crap, just use the weapon if and when you fight him and move on. And at this point, the game will have likely moved you to the capital, where you'll fight Margit, or Margot, or whatever the hell they call him. The naming conventions they use are intentionally confusing, and I hate it. I'm thinking, didn't I already fight this guy at the beginning of the game? But whatever. He fights a bit different now, so take that for what it is. He has the standard Souls-like difficulty curve and is somewhat straightforward to beat, but none of his attacks are really that annoying or unfair, comparatively speaking, and you're off to the mountaintops of the Giants, where we come to a boss who isn't a rune holder, but is required all the same for story purposes. The Fire Giant, in my opinion, is hard, to say the least. He is second only to Millennia in difficulty, in my opinion. And if Millennia didn't have her stupid healing mechanic every time she hit you, she would drop down the boss difficulty rankings like Redondo in his Comet Fall attack. That would then put the Fire Giant at number 1 for me. I don't know what it is, but this guy seems to always kill me like 25 times before I get the win. Every playthrough. It's like I don't learn my lesson or something when fighting him. He just has my number. His size makes him an issue, but he does the Dark Souls roll as if he is my size, which is hilarious to watch. He hits about as hard as you would expect from just looking at him. I mean, come on now. And he has a huge HP pool that will test your offensive capabilities. And he would love to have you take your time as he rolls around for a half an hour, squashing you with his big-ass iron plate. He's got a gimp foot, which is his weak point, and it needs amputated desperately. So I think you can help out with that. Outside of all that, and despite all the fits that he gives me specifically, he is still pretty straightforward, and he doesn't employ any crazy tricks. It's just his size and hitboxes is the trick. Now, for some reason, when you beat him, you end up at this small location called Crumbling Ferrum Azula. Assuming you didn't use exploits to get there early, you're simply teleported there after you burn your maiden to get into the air tree, for some reason. Oh yeah, that's the big golden tree. It's the ear tree. And it must burn in order for you to get in. Anyways, the last roadblock is here. And no, I'm not talking about everyone's favorite boss fight, the Godskin duo, who I guess would be worth talking about in their own right if it were not for the somewhat excessive reuse of them individually at different points throughout the lands between. You know what you're getting here. It's just both of them at the same time. Now, nothing too insane. They do share a health bar and have their own at the same time, so that's kind of confusing. It's something, I guess. But no, the guy that I'm talking about here is Malekith, the Beastman. His first phase starts out as the exact 1-to-1 of the Beast Clergyman that you can go around collecting Deathroot for at the Bestial Sanctum far, far away from Ferrum Azula. But this would be his boss fight proper. After you beat his phase 1, which is pretty easy seeing as how he has no status immunities, really, except for Frenzy and Death Blight, which are both reserves for Tarnished only, he enters his second phase, which is the real boss. This is when he is Malekith, and he's pretty gnarly as a boss fight. It's probably advised to use the pillars in the arena as cover because his gimmick is that weird health drain status thing that Black Knife Tish likes to use, and it's available for you on the Black Knife weapon, but you can use it as well, and it's helpful here. No one and nothing in this game is immune to this effect, to my knowledge. So you can use it on Malekith, and I would just expect to die at least a couple times in this fight because his quickness is likely to catch you off guard a lot before you finally get the win, unless you're a speedrunner, of course. Getting down to the end here, before you enter the tree and fight the final bosses, you have to fight Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. And man, this is a strange fight, as he is both surprisingly straightforward and employs a lot of bullshit tactics to fight you. So, to be more specific, he loves to cover the entire arena in a big fat hitbox. And if that isn't enough, much like the human player, he is absolutely not afraid to spam this over and over and over again. Like, if you can cover the whole arena in a hitbox as the human player, there's a lot of times, especially when you were backed into a corner, that you would. I mean, this is horrible boss design in my opinion, but just look at this. how often he's spamming this is garbage. It's ridiculous for a computer boss enemy to be programmed this way and have such a bullshit attack that he does all the time. I don't know. This is ridiculous. Anyways, if you can manage to power through that nonsense and eventually get the W, he turns into a pro wrestler. And that's a first one for the Souls series, I think. It's much easier to beat, so much so that I didn't even get footage of that phase because it's simple and this video is long enough as it is. Anyway, finally, you get into the Flaming Tree and you have to fight Radagon of the Golden Order. Now, I won't pretend to understand the lore here, but that is who he is. I like to trick myself out with stuff that resists holy damage because it's really all he uses, and the fight is much easier that way. Much like Horalu before him, though, he absolutely loves big, fat hitboxes that like to take up 90% of the real estate that you're looking to occupy during the fight at any given time. Big, fat hitboxes are kind of the theme here at the end of the game, I'm noticing. Once you kill Radagon, though, which isn't that hard, frankly, the second phase of the fight begins, and is also one of the most confusing and jarring boss transitions in the entire Souls series, to the point where I don't understand at all what one has to do with the other. That's pretty rare, but whatever. The second phase is the Elden Beast, and is the last boss standing between you and the game's credits. He has a big, beefy HP bar, and the main reason he's so difficult to begin with is only because you're fatigued from the Radagon fight, otherwise this wouldn't be so bad. Much like Radagon, though, he loves to employ holy damage and do moves that have homing abilities, or moves that have big, fat hitboxes, or whatever it thinks will work. The biggest thing that makes it difficult is really just that, and the fact that it likes to run from you. And when I say run, I mean spend large chunks of the fight completely unavailable to take damage because either he's way too high up or way too low down, or even just way too far away. Sometimes a combination of those. He's just always very, very far from you, geologically speaking, and I don't know why. Either way, if it weren't for all the running, this fight would be, it wouldn't be as annoying as it is, but once you do that, you're all done. Good job. Congratulations. It's been quite the journey. Things won't get weirder than this. Anyways, as of this video, Elden Ring added a free PvP Coliseum update, but no real DLC otherwise. There's a really good chance you played this game to death if you're watching this, so I hope you enjoyed my 2 cents on the topic. Thankfully, there's not too much more to say about this in the game at large.
Our seed will look back upon us and recall an age of fracture.
So that's it. That about covers Elden Ring. It is definitely the natural progression of the Dark Souls franchise. It's exactly where Dark Souls 4 would go if it ever got made. Not to say it wouldn't have sold more, because you can't sell much better than Elden Ring. A AAA game that just everybody was excited for and bought on opening day, and it did not disappoint. The natural progression from Dark Souls 3 through Sekiro and whatever, all the way to Elden Ring, and what a Souls game should be, from the combat to the movement to the design of the open world. Everything about it is exactly where it should have gone and would have naturally gone had they made that game instead of Elden Ring. The addition of a damn jump button was just revolutionary. So the only thing that I can say that's really negative about it is any frustrations that I might have with traditional Dark Souls jank that is just there. But aside from that, the sound design, the lore, the storytelling, the combat system, the Ashes of War, the whole thing, wonderful. So I can't give it a perfect score because it isn't a perfect game. So with that, I give the game probably a 4.5 out of 5. Almost perfect. Right there at the finish line. Just a few things that it could have tweaked and done better in my mind. Another thing that makes it worse is all the nerfs to the weapons that I liked from the beginning. Don't tell anybody though. But that being said, I'd like to thank you for staying so sexy on the line. You guys have a good one.